Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Jayanthi, and I am from Solar One, and welcome to the final Clean Energy Connections event of 2012.
Hi everyone, Micah Koch from NYC Acre at NYU Poly. Thanks for being here.
So in a couple of minutes we'll be bringing out the panel, but Micah and I first wanted to say a few things. First and foremost, it's been an incredible 2 years of doing Clean Energy Connections for the New York City clean tech community. We're really excited about all the panels that we've done. We've done everything from panels about wind in New York City to biomimicry to clean tech policy to, the implementation of electric vehicles. So it's really excited that engaging and informing the New York City clean tech community with our programming. But tonight we are talking about collaborative consumption, and Micah is going to talk a little bit more about that. As always, this is a discussion and a conversation. It's not a lecture. So if audience members have questions, if you're in the in-person audience, please write your questions down on note cards. If you're in the in-person or the online audience, feel free to tweet your questions at CleanECNYC, #CleanNRGX, and we'll make sure that the moderator gets them. Finally, I want to thank our sponsors. We really wouldn't be able to do this event without their support, NYSERDA, Con Edison, and Loeb & Loeb. And thank our series partners for all their help to make our events such a success. The New York City Association for Energy Economics, Young Professionals in Energy, Delve, and of course our media sponsor, Green Tech Media. So Micah, take it away.
Great. Just a couple of quick programming notes. This is obviously not the only event happening in New York City. So this Thursday, there's a great lunch in Midtown. The New York Association for Energy Economists is having an event with Jill Anderson from the New York Power Authority, and Jill's going to be talking about the New York Energy Superhighway. And then we'll be doing our next Clean Energy Connections event here on February 5th. So please save the date for that. As Sarah said, we've been doing this for a while now, and in bringing together different stakeholders, members of the investment community and the startup community and the academic community and the NGO community and policymakers, we wanted to give New York a platform for some thought leadership on issues that we think are really important and are impacting the city's economy and more broadly, actually, the global economy. So, with this one, whether you call it the access economy or the sharing economy, or you talk about things like collaborative consumption, the truth is that this has been a topic that's actually been around for a very long time. So 34 years ago, actually, there was a paper written by a guy named Joe Speth and Marcus Felsen, and it was titled Community Structure and Collaborative Consumption, a Routine Activity Approach. And that was published actually in American Behavioral Scientist in 1978, and it talked just about car sharing. But I think what's interesting now that you see this theme spreading into transportation and travel and insurance and energy is that people are starting to get connected back to what's most important, which is our community, our environment, and the way that we nourish ourselves, the way that we power our homes, and all the things that make modern life possible. So as access shifts from ownership to this new shared experience, we actually think that you're going to see positive triple bottom line impacts. And there are people who are actually on the front lines who are building businesses, who are creating jobs, who are creating wealth, and we wanted you to hear from them and to give them an opportunity to share the areas where they think that they can actually make a dent. I just wanted to finish with two quick quotes. One is from Rachel Botsman, who has really been championing the topic around collaborative consumption for quite some time. She said that she wrote a book called What's Mine is Yours, The Rise of Collaborative Consumption. She said that basically we're reinventing things that we used to do in village squares. Share, barter, rent, swap. But we can do them in ways that are relevant to the Facebook age. And I think that opportunity is really compelling. And then just the last thing that I'll leave you with before I introduce David from Con Edison is a great quote from the design firm Fjord, who was talking about trends that they're seeing in 2013. And they said, we've seen seismic shifts in the area of digital distribution of music, movies, and every other form of media. Users now expect their purchases to be portable and consumable on multiple platforms. We crave flexibility, and the way we buy and own is changing accordingly. In the past, we projected our status and success through the things we owned, the car in the driveway, the vacation house, the books and the CDs that we displayed in our home. But increasingly, status is now projected through our experiences and pursuits, and consequently, the desire to own material objects fades. So tonight we're going to find out if that's actually true, and if there's a real future in that. So with great pleasure, I want to introduce David Pospisil from Con Edison, who has been a series sponsor and a great friend for Clean Energy Connections. David.
I'm just going to grab my stuff.
Sure.
All the pens.
Well, I'm so happy we finally made it to this room. I'm not sure if you were coming last time, but it was a day or two after the storm, and obviously that was a little disruptive to us. At Con Edison, that was really a all-hands-on-deck event for us. I have a team that was all dispatched all around our service territory, doing a variety of things from directing out-of-state crews to where they had to go and help them fuel up, to people who were providing dry ice to customers, and a whole plethora of things just to try to get New York City back online. But I think the most interesting point is that the storm really brought front and center some of the things we've been talking about for the last 2 years. And you know, it's smart grid, it's sustainability, it's a whole bunch of things that this series has really brought some very intelligent and interesting discussion. We've been a proud sponsor for the last 2 years. I think this series has really set the bar for quality in terms of topics, participants, production, as well as the audience. I think that, you know, we all kind of migrate or travel in this space, and we know that there's a lot of programming out there. A lot of it is redundant. A lot of it, we go and hear the same thing over and over again. And I think that this series has really gone out there and carved out a niche and an audience that's unique. And it's an intersection between, you know, technology and sustainability and social media. And Sarah even taught me how to do social media. So if she can teach me, she can teach anybody. So we're happy. We're so proud to be part of this. And tonight's going to be great. But I'd really like to thank Sarah and Micah for all the hard work they've done on this. They really created this from scratch, them and the folks that helped them. And this would never happen without them. So with no further delay, we'd like to move on to the panel, and I'd like to introduce Brian Merchant from Motherboard, your moderator for tonight.
All right. Good evening, everybody. I think Micah pretty much covered the groundwork for what collaborative consumption is all about, so I think we're just going to dig right in here, and we're really going to be looking at kind of what happens after kind of the halo fades. It's been a buzzword. It's been kind of it's been heavily hyped for some time now. So this next year, we're going to really kind of see what happens when these collaborative consumption models really kind of hit the ground. So these guys are in the trenches, and they're going to be our guides. So, all right. All right. So to start things off, I'd like to ask each one of you if we could maybe go down the line, starting with we have David Mahfouda over here from Weeels, and we have Andrew Wagner from Krrb, and we have Shawn Chapman from SolarCity, and Singh from BrightFarms, and they each have very different kind of roles to play in the sharing economy. So, what does your company do? How does it contribute to the sharing economy?
Sure. So my name is David. I run a company called Weeels, and we build products that facilitate taxi sharing. So we have a product that we're working on at LaGuardia Airport that allows passengers that are waiting in line for a taxi to identify other people that are going where they're going, to save time, save energy, and save money. And then we also build software products that make the reverse trip possible, again, for decreased cost, environmental and economic costs.
Andrew?
The easiest way to describe Krrb is that it's if Etsy and Craigslist had a baby, that would be Krrb. So we're a hyper-local marketplace. We like to call it hyper-local, mega global. So you can either search for things that are being sold secondhand only within a 3-block radius, or you can expand out to a world view and see what's being sold across the whole world.
What's funny about that is there's actually a section on Craigslist misconnections where you can make that baby making happen.
Yes, exactly.
I think it's funny. So I'm Shawn Chapman. I'm from SolarCity, and so we interact with the shared economy in a number of ways. But the primary way in which we do that is that we've worked to fundamentally solve the number one challenge for consumers to go solar, which is once upon a time, $50,000 for a solar system, customer, regular Joe or Jane, 10-year value proposition, can't make those numbers work. What we've done is collaborated with using financial instruments to help group purchase that system. So that system is owned by a person or many persons, maybe not the host customer, and they can benefit from the solar electricity, which we call better energy. And frankly, it democratizes the solar value proposition.
So, hey, I'm Singh from BrightFarms. We, very simply, we build urban greenhouse farms to supply fresh lettuces and tomatoes to communities. So you're not really sharing too much from us, but what we do deliver to the shared economy is local food to you wherever you may reside. So there's a huge clamoring for local food. It's become the new organic, if you will, according to Whole Foods. And we have a hard time getting access to local foods. So we have to go to farmers markets, we have to sign up to CSAs, and it's just not convenient. So we solve that by growing food locally where it's consumed and delivering it to supermarkets' shelves where you go and buy it. And I can talk more about the model as we move on.
Great. So let's start off by trying to form a bit of a consensus about what the sharing economy is right now. Each one of you has been well aware of the so-called rise of the sharing economy, and you've been dealing with investors and the PR sphere, and you've seen the buzz, and you are certainly well aware of this phenomenon that everybody's talking about. So where does it stand right now? Where is the sharing economy? Is it waxing? Is it waning? Is it a fad? And why don't we start with Andrew?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think Brian, in our talks, you kind of pulled it out. It's at a very critical point, I think, where there's been so much buzz about it, there's been so much talk about it, and there's been some great examples of super successful things within the sharing economy, Zipcar, Airbnb, as we talked a lot about. But we're at a point where it's really going to be, it's a great thing to sort of, I don't want to say fantasize about, but everybody has a lot of romantic ideals about it. And we're at a point where it's now time to put some really viable business models to these things and see if they're actually going to, if they can be viable businesses.
Yeah, so I think that there's a shared economy all around us, and parts that are acceptable and parts that are unacceptable. I'll let our friends from Weeels talk about this a little bit more as well. But the utility model, for instance, is a shared economy. I mean, the centralized generation of electricity, getting wires across people's backyards and things, under rivers, over the river, through woods, and into grandmother's house so that she can watch Matlock at 5 p.m., that is a shared economy. We collectively come together to fund that. That's an acceptable thing that we seem to be all right with. Somehow we're not okay with sitting in the back of a taxi cab with one another for some reason. I don't know why.
Well, some of us are.
Yeah.
Well, so I want to talk to that, but I also want to talk about this idea of the sharing economy as a romantic idea. So the first thing I want to say is that I I think it's an idea based in reality. So we have dwindling resources, and the reality is that by sharing them, we can stretch those resources out further. So I see the sharing economy as definitively waxing in the next 10 to 20 years. Definitively waxing in the next 10 to 20 years, particularly because we are running out of a variety of vital resources. And so to speak to the point of sort of from a cultural perspective, how people interact with sharing services, I think as our resources dwindle, the incentives for sharing them just increase. And so what we're seeing at the airport is that if you create the right incentives for passengers, they're totally willing to share. So for instance, if you make it faster for passengers to get into a shared taxi as opposed to get into a single taxi, no doubt about it, passengers are begging us to get into the shared line. And similarly, if you make it cheaper, especially as costs rise, I think you'll see a lot of movement in the market toward sharing.
Yeah. And sharing is necessary to get a lot of these models to work. And I'd like it if you could elaborate on that a little bit more, because a lot of these business models really depend on getting two people that otherwise never would have to make a transaction together, to share a cab, to trust somebody. And you know we see this in Airbnb is probably the most high profile example. You got to trust somebody to not screw up your home when you're letting them rent your bedroom. So what is Weeels doing to sort of encourage that trust, to foster it?
So the first thing is sort of giving people carrots in order to even make that leap in the first place. So like I said earlier, the right incentives are really critical. For us, we found that allowing people to save time and save money really encourages them and gets them excited about sharing. So the next thing that I think is also really critical is using existing communities. So one strategy that Weeels has taken is actually licensed our software to Earth Day Canada, who has this large community of people that's interested in sharing, that's interested in environmental issues, and already has a degree of trust built into that community. And we're basically leveraging that community to launch our software in a place where that trust is already not an issue. The airport is also a really interesting example because there's an entrance fee to get to the airport. So you had to have already paid for a flight, which further sort of gates the community. And we see situations in which we have these gated communities as really ripe for building for being the seed beds for launching sharing services.
So
Yeah.
it sort of strikes me that you've just had a shared experience on this big jumbo jet, but people are uncomfortable getting into a
Exactly.
cab. That's sort of wild, right? That's weird.
It is weird. And so, but I think, and that's a lot of the work that Weeels has to do is sort of point out that weirdness and just get people to try it. And once people have tried taxi sharing in the past, they're willing to do so in the future.
Yeah, that's kind of a common theme that runs through all of these. It's a strange thing. It's an opportunity to look back at these behaviors that really should be normal. I mean, I'm the guy that's in the taxi line right now that is yelling, going like, "Who else is going to Williamsburg?" And everybody kind of looks at me, and someone eventually will kind of begrudgingly go like, "Me, I want to save $20, so let's do this."
Right.
But we have these systems now that are sort of normalizing social behavior, and if you could, with Krrb is really is doing this to some extent in that you're hooking two people up who want to reuse an item in their hyper-local neighborhoods, right?
Well, in terms of trust, it's been a really interesting thing, and Krrb was founded on the idea of trust. Craigslist is great, but we all know about the Craigslist killer. We all know about all the various things, crazy things that happen on Craigslist, and that really scares people off. So with Krrb, what we did was it's free to get involved, but you have to give us certain amounts of information in order to ensure that you are a real person, you're not a scammer, etc. So if you give us your name, you get a certain amount of free credits that you can use on Krrb. If you hook up via Facebook, you get more free credits, so on and on. So essentially, you're becoming a reputable online persona.
Have you run into any problem? Have you gotten any complaints about a creepy guy trying to lure someone into their garage?
Thankfully, we haven't had that. We have had things where people are unsatisfied with the things that they've arranged to buy and things like that. But the real interesting thing, I think, was, we were talking a bit about this in the back, is, Krrb is founded on a real ideal, a real philosophical ideal. We love cities, first of all, is what it's founded on. We love walking around our neighborhoods. We get so excited about meeting our neighborhoods, but we're kind of geeks. We're kind of like, I love talking to people. I'll talk to anyone. I'll gladly go into someone's home and share a beer after I buy their coffee table. Most people don't want to do that, actually. And that was one of our first big problems that we came up against, was like, hey, everybody wants to do that. Wouldn't that be cool if you went over and bought a coffee table? And the guy said, hey, why don't you have dinner? God, that would be awesome. Most people are like, I really don't want to go over and meet this person. So we had to figure out how to get past that. And so this idea of trust and this idea of trusting strangers and feeling comfortable in a scenario where you don't know the people you're dealing with is a real issue for the whole sharing economy. And I would imagine, especially for you guys who are working on where a lot more money is invested than a $40 coffee table. Yeah.
I would say that both, I'd say a common theme between all four of us is that we're all consumer facing to an extent. Right. And trust for consumers is obviously extremely important. Our brands and our reputations are critical to our businesses. The second piece I think that we all are trying to do well at, if not better, is ease of use, right? Is making what your disruption, your change to the way that we do things, making it really easy to do. For us, it's putting local produce on consumer shelves. For you, it's making it easy to get solar roof, and for you, making it easy to share services. So I mean, it's about ease of use, and trust I think is very common between us.
Yeah, I want to say one thing about trust, which is, the reason our companies exist is in order to sort of act as the middle person, to sort of facilitate individuals trusting one another. Yeah. So in Weeels' case, passengers pay Weeels for their shared ride instead of splitting the fare amongst one another directly. And I think that's another way in which we're making the interaction easier for passengers. And I think that's a role that all of our companies play.
Yeah, and just thinking about this, what's kind of strange about it is it's sort of intuitive to me, but it may not be intuitive to all. But there really is no difference between leasing a car and leasing a solar system. It is fundamentally the same exact thing. Mm-hmm. And trying to get people to wrap their heads around that, I think, has been a challenge. I'm just not sure why.
Yeah. Yeah, I hate to get philosophical so early in the program here, but what is it about, is it technology? Is it this new interface that people are more comfortable with? But what is it about your models that allows you to break through to the consumer and to kind of ease those awkward social moments? What do you think that it is that you're doing that's propelling this shift?
For us, and I think you hit on it precisely, is teaming up with existing communities. And we were kind of not scuffling along. We had built a beautiful piece of technology, but we teamed up with a site called Apartment Therapy, which is one of the biggest design sites out there, 10 million unique visitors. And as soon as we did that and they started using our product, all of a sudden people were like, oh yeah, Apartment Therapy, cool. I'm comfortable with that. But that's because Apartment Therapy had already put 10 years into building up that trust, building up that, and that's a huge thing and can't be undervalued.
Yeah, getting a cheaper electricity bill goes a real long way for us. It just goes real far.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not a tough sell.
Works out.
Yeah.
And Shawn points out something else that's interesting, which is piggybacking on existing ideas. So the idea of leasing is something that everyone understands, but leasing a solar system is something that people understand less. But if you say it's like leasing a solar system, then people understand it more. So in Weeels' case, at the airport, we have a high occupancy taxi lane, which is slightly different than a high occupancy vehicle lane, but it allows people to kind of understand why, what's going on and why.
Right. And I want to talk a little more with you, Shawn, because I think you're right that energy is one of the most important things that we share, and it's one of the most important things that we need to change how we share. And if I could pinpoint maybe one major shift that I'd like to see collaborative consumption propel, it would be in the energy market. And you guys are really involved in doing things with communities, getting community solar, shared solar. Can you explain a little bit about how those investments and those models work?
Sure. It's called a number of different things. The best name for it, PR-wise, is community solar. Then it's also been called aggregate net metering, virtual net metering, solar shares programs. SMUD was one of the pioneers of that, SMUD being Sacramento Municipal Utility District. Basically, there's a bunch of people in Sacramento that have really crappy roofs, but they still want to invest in the solar value proposition. So they went and found a spot that solar would work for them, and they invested in it together and got credit on their bill, working with the local utility on that, and it's worked out great. And that disease has spread to such far-flung places as Massachusetts, New York offers it now, Virginia, Colorado, California, all of those in various forms and machinations, but the principle is the same, right? You live in a basement apartment here on Varick Street. Nightlife is great, but the solar resource is crappy. So if you can work with your neighbors to invest in a solar system on the roof, say, where should actually be a pretty good area for solar because there are not going to be a lot of high rises going up here. Due to zoning, so you can collaboratively.
And do you have a long-term picture of, or what the potential is if this is carried out to a degree? Can we democratize solar? Can we democratize energy in general? Can we kind of wean ourselves off of standard utilities?
Are you trying to tell me that we're going to get rid of Con Ed, one of the fine sponsors of this program? Are you trying to get me to say that? I will not say that. I will not say that. I will just say that we will make the solar value proposition great and easy for all.
Well, let it be noted that countries like Germany are seeing this kind of process happen with the right incentives, with different policy machinations. They're able to inspire sort of community solar. And I think at one point earlier this year, Germany had 50% of its demand met with solar power. I don't know if you...
Yeah, I mean, they have had periods where 100% was met.
Yeah.
And there are ridiculous statistics of all, 50% or more of all new generation coming online was either wind or solar. So that number is starting to be penetrated here in the United States, where upwards of 20% of all new generation coming online. We have this great natural gas boom, which is great and wonderful. But other than that, those investments are coming online, and they are responsible for a greater and greater and greater and greater share of the new generation coming online because of these policy mechanisms that come forward.
Right.
When I think about energy, and I'll just chime in here, I was in the energy efficiency business earlier, and that was a tough slog getting people to care about the energy bills and actually do things to change it. But what we do at BrightFarms is, because we're producing, on our 1 to 2 acre facilities, we're producing 500,000 pounds of lettuce, let's say. And that's 1.5 clamshells that you take home from the grocery store, 1.5 million, and we're not transporting it from Arizona and California to get to our shelves here. We're harvesting it and putting it in supermarket shelves, within 10, 20 miles. So we're really reducing a significant amount of transportation-related waste. So that's often oil, and which I find very impactful, that we can reduce that kind of waste as opposed to electrons. But that's kind of just a natural product of the.
Can you give us an idea of what the size of those savings would be typically? Do you have numbers on hand?
In terms of the dollar?
So resources, emissions, or?
Sure. So I won't talk in emissions because I don't think we've done a good job of converting emissions into dollars. But I will say that we build these greenhouses that are substantially smaller than the much larger growing facilities. A growing facility, where we get our produce from today is from these gigantic growing facilities that grow very well, and they grow very cost effectively, but then they transport everything thousands of miles. So we are building much less efficiently and these much smaller footprints, but we're not transporting at all.
Downstairs.
We're transporting downstairs.
Right.
So that savings is enough for us to attract a significant amount of project funding for each of our beautiful greenhouse projects, and a lot of corporate funding. So we've been very successful, and we're obviously showing a growth profile that's attractive to investors. So we're making money on the transportation arbitrage.
Yeah. So you're seeing. Let's talk about funding for a second. How have you gone about raising funds? Have you seen an increased amount of interest in the model itself? Are you able to ride some of this wave of trying to be the Airbnb of X? Or what kind of funding opportunities exist right now?
Yeah, sure. So there are two questions there. So to answer the funding question first, so we have some revenue. We've licensed our software to Earth Day Canada, so that was a first sale for us. We were really excited about that. And then we've raised money from friends and family, and also we've been funded through a generous NYSERDA grant. But in general, sort of the buzz around collaborative consumption and the growth of collaborative consumption, I think, is a win for companies across the board. We were talking earlier about how even the familiarity with sharing in general is something that. So if I know how to share an apartment via Airbnb, that makes it that much easier for me to share a taxi to my apartment that I just rented via Airbnb. So.
Yeah, we're funded. We're self-funded, and how do we self-fund that? We're also an interactive agency called Area 17, and we have a lot of big major clients that we build a lot of amazing stuff for. And one day we were kind of like, hey, we're doing all this cool stuff for other people, and we have a lot of ideas we want to try. So we now have 3 of our own products, Krrb being one of them.
Shawn?
Read your newspapers.
So,
Suffice to say that there's a lot of noise around SolarCity right now, a lot of speculation at the moment. Exciting times. Sorry, go ahead.
That's right. So I love talking about financing because I'm the director of project finance, and so I have a lot of fun with it. Our corporation is financed by individual investors, family offices, and traditional venture capital. It's a really fun business because it just checks a lot of boxes. So it's kind of agriculture, it's healthy food, it's food access, it's clean technology, it's, depending where we develop, we're low-income community development, we're social impact, and kind of the list goes on. And so I have a blast talking to mission-driven investors, people who have capital and want to make an impact and just don't see enough high-quality deals to fund. And so I've entered a world of a very friendly and fun finance. And coming from a banking background, it's a real pleasurable change.
That does sound fun. Okay, so I'm getting a lot of good questions here, and one of them was going to be was on the tip of my tongue. Anyways, so let's as the sharing economy grows, it's starting to bump up against the old economy, the boring economy, and it's often ugly. You have new companies like Uber, I think, is the most dramatic example, where it's Uber, if you aren't aware, is a ride summoning service with black cabs first and then taxis, and they're running afoul of transit ordinances left and right. I think their taxi app just got shut down in New York because they violated some codes, and they're facing opposition from the unions and yada, yada, yada. So this is going to be something that we see that I think most of your companies are going to run up against, not just regulatory frameworks, but competition. So where are you seeing some of this friction? What are the obstacles to growth, regulatory or otherwise? Let's start with Shawn. I know.
Because
because you're a point man.
Fair enough. We run up against this a lot, obviously. I can't think of anything older than coal. Literally, yeah. I can't think of anything older than coal. It's very old. That's the nature of it. And so we are obviously using a newer form. Oh, no, I can't think of something older than coal. The sun. Yeah, the sun is older than coal. Yeah, so there's that. So we're trying to, it's weird. We're trying to get older than the old economy. That's kind of weird. I never thought of it that way. So, yeah, we're certainly bumping against that. For instance, and my wife, who's here in the audience and is smirking right now and knows how hopping mad I was on Thursday evening. A lot of cussing, a lot of pacing, a lot of scotch. On Thursday night, the town of Poughkeepsie decided to pass an ordinance banning solar systems and wind systems for 3 months. 3 months. For a company that installs solar systems, that's kind of a problem. We'd like to install them. Our customers like having them. So I called the town supervisor, and he assured me.
Can you tell why did they ban them?
Well, here's what happened. One customer, not a SolarCity customer, but a solar customer, their best solar resource was apparently in their front yard, and they decided to do a ground mount system in their front yard, to which some neighbors preferred the waving armed Santa over the solar system, I think.
Yeah.
And
was this a system that SolarCity had leased?
No. Not one of our customers. No affiliation with us at all. But however, they took opposition to it, and so instead of like thinking through this rationally, it passed the zoning board. They decided to put a 3-month ban. Now, some systems will sneak through. It's not an all-right moratorium. He assured me there'd be use variance, but make no mistake. That's if let's take a thought experiment here. Let's not make it something unfamiliar like solar systems. Let's make it DirecTV, okay? If someone told you you can't have DirecTV for 3 months, and I guess we're in the WNYC green space here, so you guys probably don't watch football. You probably like listen to Jonathan Schwartz on Sundays. But let's pretend you watch football on Sundays, and let's pretend that you'd want to get access to that. How angry would that make you? Oh, it would make people so angry that the federal government would make it illegal for you to make a ban on that. So you have a right to get DirecTV on your house. Got to remember what my wife told me on Thursday. Just like calm down. So you have a right to get DirecTV on your house, but you don't have a right to get solar on your house. That's crazy.
Right. So what do you do? How do you reassure consumers that still want to lease your system that you're working through this? Do you lobby, or how do you navigate these waters?
You get on a hyper local web streaming show and yell about it a lot, and you tell them to watch that and say, "I swear I'm working on it. I swear I'm working on it."
Have you run up against any regulatory hurdles working with cab systems? I know it's a kind of a naughty.
So we work with the Taxi and Limousine Commission and the Port Authority. We need one thing from the Taxi and Limousine Commission, which is to allow passengers to split the fare. So we find that it's difficult for passengers to engage in this backseat negotiation, and we're working with the TLC to create a new pilot policy that will enable 2 passengers to pay with a credit card in a cab. So it's a very simple thing, but we've been working on it for a long time.
Because right now you have to pay one fare is one.
Yeah. So in order to get around that, what we're doing, we have to add decision layers to our software and to our process. So we have to ask every passenger whether they're paying with cash and credit, and then we only match credit-paying customers with cash-paying customers. So in addition to it being difficult to explain that to passengers, it also just flat out reduces the number of shares we can create. So that is the regulatory issue that Weeels is running up against right now.
Yeah, I saw you wanting to jump in, Andrew.
I was just going to say, we have not really run up against regulatory issues, but what is interesting is regulatory issues, I guess in a way we have. We work a lot with partnerships, and that's how we sort of spread what we're doing. We really look at Krrb as a platform. Right now, the platform is used most in regard to furniture because, furniture, you'll buy a couch right next door to you, but you probably don't want to ship it from California. So that's the use of the hyper-local angle. And so we've always been thinking, well, what are these real local things that people want to do locally within their neighborhood without having to go outside their neighborhood? And food is a big one. And we're really interested in expanding to the food market. So we've been talking to Whole Foods a lot. And Whole Foods really interested. We went down to Austin, Texas. We had a great talk working with them. And then they were like, well, I don't know if we can do it because we can't have things being put up with our name on it that hasn't gone through our rigorous processes of being okayed and being, gone through all their, because they have a name to protect. And so Whole Foods, because the scale they're at has to have regulation, and that slows everything down. Whereas Whereas we were lucky with Apartment Therapy working as a partner because they're a young, tech firm too, and they're like, hey, let's do it. So yeah, there are issues, and that will, slow things down.
Yeah.
So it turns out that Whole Foods isn't the only supermarket chain that's hard to work with. They're really hard to work with.
Yeah.
And as a farmer, if you consider me a farmer, which I'm probably not a farmer.
Funny-looking farmer.
I'm a funny-looking farmer. They struggle getting our products on shelves. Yeah. And so we said, let's tackle this problem. And this hurdle became our innovation. So we said, let's tackle the problem of getting our products on supermarket shelves. So let's go to the supermarket first and work with them. So we said, Mr. Supermarket, we want you to sign a 10-year agreement with us, guaranteeing that you purchase everything that we grow before we grow it. So we're a farmer. We're saying we're going to sell everything before we start planting anything. And we called this contract, you may be familiar with something like this, a PPA, a produce purchase agreement. Why are supermarkets signing 10-year agreements? Turns out they don't like signing 10-year agreements for anything, and they never have. And they sign it for a couple of reasons. One, it's the same price. So we price it the same as the clamshell they're buying from California. Two, if lettuce has a shelf life of 9 days and ours gets on the shelf in the same day versus taking 4 days to come from California, turns out ours may last longer and they actually get some economic benefit from that and less shrink and higher margins. Also, the third reason then is consumers are demanding it. And it's not only because it's fresher, but the tomatoes you get from Canada to Mexico, they're really nice tomatoes in that they travel really well. They're really robust and you can almost bounce them. They're great, but they taste like crap. So if you could grow a tomato and choose a variety of tomato that actually produces a really red, nutritious, delicious tomato and get that on your shelf, there's a chance that your consumer bypasses the neighboring supermarket and goes to your supermarket to get that ultra-fresh produce. So that's really our innovation that enables us to get financing, and that's our biggest hurdle, but it's also the reason why we have a business model that we believe can succeed.
So it's kind of funny, like a hurdle, a regulatory hurdle, or any other kind of hurdle like this can also turn into an opportunity. So with housing authorities, what their main beef is, they want all the housing stock to look the same. And I can think of no bigger, greater housing authority than the United States military. So this is one area where we had a partnership with SolarStrong, which is a project we are really proud of, where all the houses do look the same. They all have solar on them. So that's an opportunity born out of a challenge. Yeah. So sure, instead of selling one, we'll sell you 100. Sure.
Yeah, agreed. And I do want to point out that in the case of Whole Foods that I brought up, that's actually a really good regulation. When they said that, we weren't like, oh, what are you talking about? Put whatever you want in your body, So these rules are in place, and I think a challenge for all of us is figuring out how to maneuver within these guidelines that are actually there for good reason.
Yeah. I would actually say our second, if we had to name a number two, sort of backlash we get is from farmers themselves. And farmers are saying, you're destroying our business. Firstly, there's not a ton of lettuce farmers in winter in New York. Okay, it's coming from California, so we're not really destroying their business. And tomatoes, kind of same thing. There's a few small operations that work year-round, but not really. So no one really is supplying commercial scale produce like we are. The other thing is that we're going around creating discrete farms all over the country. And that means we're creating farms, and we need head growers to run those farms. So actually what we're doing is creating a huge opportunity for farmers who have a hard time making ends meet. I mean, we're paying our first head grower at our Pennsylvania facility about 3 times what he makes today. And so we're really providing a huge employment activity and opportunity for these guys.
So where are you hiring your farmers from to run these hydroponic systems? Because I think this is an important thing to address, is that if the sharing economy grows to scale as we all kind of hope that it does, then inevitably there are going to be manufacturers, service providers, farmers that get displaced. So how do you address that? How do you deal directly with the farmers? Are you hiring them away?
Well, you're from Williamsburg, and we grow hydroponically. Where do you think we're getting our farmers from? I'm just kidding. No, there's a hydroponic produce. Hydroponic growing is 10 times more water efficient and 7 times more land efficient than conventional agriculture. So it wouldn't surprise you to hear that there are a lot of schools that have programs dedicated towards improving hydroponic growing. And it turns out the Dutch are the experts in this, and they've been doing this for 40 years. I mean, you see these beautiful Peppers, bell peppers on shelves here, and they're all from Holland, right? These are Dutch hydroponic operations bringing their goods overseas. So turns out there's actually a big ecosystem. I don't know where to find them, and I'm not looking for your buddies. So I'm looking for they're looking for going to schools and trying to we have recruiters going out to schools and finding these farmers.
Yeah, it was the same thing for us. Is when you have a localized economy, so we install tons of solar systems in New York, right? That's the place where we install solar systems. It's really, really, really hard to install those systems from China. Really impossible, in fact. It is impossible. So they're New York workers who install them.
Yeah. So you're creating jobs. How many jobs have you created in New York? Do you have any idea?
That's about 100 plus.
100 plus jobs. Yeah. So I think this is a good opportunity to segue. What are your expectations for the sharing economy as a whole? Do you expect that in 20 years a significant portion of our economy will be dominated by trading and swapping goods instead of buying new ones? Will we be sharing rides instead of buying new cars? Is this going to really be a disruptive force, or are we going to kind of see a few successful business models like your Zipcar and your Netflix here and there?
So I can talk about cars. Yeah, I think people are going to buy fewer cars. They're already starting to buy fewer cars. I also think more and more young people are moving to cities where the idea of owning a car is preposterous. And as people move to cities, as fuel becomes more and more expensive, for-hire vehicles, all kinds of vehicle services are going to become more and more important. Yeah, I think they're going to be a dominant product in the transportation sector, definitely.
I would sort of push back a little in that it isn't already the sharing economy isn't already a huge part of what we do. It's just what's acceptable and what's not. And I think we just need to work our individual businesses into what is acceptable. For instance, raise your hand if you bought a slice of pizza in the last 2 weeks. One slice of pizza, maybe two. Did you pay for the whole pizza? No, you didn't pay for the whole pizza, because that's the sharing economy right there. That's a part of the sharing economy. How many people got here by subway? Sharing economy. Acceptable. How many people rode in a taxi to get here? Anybody? How many people rode in a taxi in the last week? Did you share that? Because it was unacceptable. So we'll nudge into that. Same with solar systems. How many people consumed electricity from an entity that wasn't self-generated? Everyone, by the way, it's everyone. You didn't raise your hands, but it is everyone. Sooner, more and more, we will edge our way into that acceptable form of the shared economy. And I wholeheartedly, fiercely believe that.
Well, and I think that leads to an interesting thing of where I think it could absolutely be a hugely dominant force, and as you point out, it already is actually, but maybe in the ways we're talking about it. And it really is this sort of changing people's perspective on what is and what isn't shared. And it's also, you can't, as a company, as a young company, you can't force massive change on people. You can't, and one thing, as I mentioned.
Yeah, you got to trick them.
Well, you do to an extent. And actually, I wanted to, I should just ask you later, but, one thing I wanted to say to you is, like, I could see an issue being, like, if I had my own house, I'd love solar power. Some dude came up and knocked on my door. I got a phone call and was like, hey, you should switch over to our solar. I'd be like, really? Like, come on. Like, I pay my bill. It's like I move on and, I pay Con Ed or whoever I pay, and I move on. I don't want to have to think too much about it. So I was wondering, wouldn't it behoove you guys to work more closely with the people who are already providing it, convince some of the good you're bringing, because they already have the customer base. They already have all these people. Figure out how to, like, infiltrate the
so we should be in, like, I don't know, we should be in, like, Home Depot, like 500 of them.
I don't know. I don't know. I would actually say, like, working with, sorry, this is bad because Con Ed's supplying this, but, working with Con Ed and saying, hey, you guys have the customer base, but you should be using our product. And, we should, like, people trust Con Ed. They know the name. They're like, cool, like, it's not a problem for me.
Yeah, so we do work with them all the time, talking to them about all kinds of things. Got a nice email from someone from Con Ed earlier in the week to work on interconnection things. So we're working with them, I assure you, on all kinds of things. So that is totally truth, and I do think that that's evolving. But we build those partnerships.
Because it is kind of a realm of it. Just has to be like people that, oh, I'm on Krrb now. Oh, and I'm going to buy a couch. They can't listen to me talk about how cool it is to hang out with your neighbor and get to know who your neighbor is. Like that, immediately you'll lose them.
Yeah. So this kind of segue. Just while we're still on the topic of kind of working with corporations and extant bodies, I like this question, which is: can the sharing economy market sharing services to corporations in addition to consumers? What are the opportunities here that you're seeing with kind of established corporations?
So we're working with small corporations. We have a development partner in Gawker magazine. So we're looking to, in addition to saving individuals money on their car service, we also want to save corporations money on their car service. And the same ride consolidation engine that we're using for individuals can be applied to corporate trip sheets in the same way that it can be applied to individuals.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, we have tons of corporate partnerships. That was just inspecting a Walmart earlier this week.
Yeah.
So the answer is it's pretty easy, and it's happening as we speak.
Yeah, and you also find alternative. They just have the upfront capital and kind of get it more, right? So like Walmart,
The credit
this
rating.
this particular system, it's in New York. I don't want to reveal too much, but like this system's going to save like 10% of their electricity uses. That's $1 million. 10%. That's crazy. So it's just. It's such a no-brainer for them and so quick. It's an easier sale, actually, in a lot of cases.
Yeah. So, and again, to change gears, I like this question too, which is what is currently constraining the sharing economy from expanding? I know the guys from Uber really rail against regulations, and a lot of people get really frustrated with the regulatory frameworks. But is there anything else that's really keeping this from taking off, from booming?
As I said earlier, I really think that it's the actual built environment and the way that the United States, for instance, has been constructed, the physical world. So, we can sit here and we sit in New York and we talk about like everybody's into it. It's because people in New York have to do it. They do it all the time. They're sharing all the time. It's just much more. They can understand it much better. If you land yourself in Des Moines, Iowa, where I was for 2.5, 3 years, like, just doesn't make sense. They're like, what? Why would I ever share a car with you? What, are you crazy? Like, get away from me. Like, in the States, America is built on this idea of space and not getting close to people. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing. And when you brought up the subway, I love that. That example, it's this great example of collaborative consumption, shared economy, but it only works in very specific places for specific reasons.
So to build on that is the built environment is the challenge. And so we've seen this with Sandy, right? Sandy totally disrupted our ability to continue on the status quo in some ways. But it forced us to think about how we're consuming our electricity in a lot of fundamental ways. And now, they are a sponsor, but if they weren't a sponsor, I would be saying the same thing. Con Edison is the most reliable utility in the world. That is statistically true. There is no other utility in the world more reliable than them. And yet, there are challenges there with the way we distribute our electricity in critical times. We still have upwards of 5,000 people without power right now. I think 6 weeks later, we sort of have to think about that. It's the built environment that is coming against the constraints of how our economy needs to grow and how wealth needs to be created and how electricity can work in the 21st century. Frankly, we are using 19th century electricity in 2013. Sorry, a couple weeks.
Yeah.
This is another situation where that constraint really benefits our business. And I guess our business was, it's a reaction to that, frankly. It's bringing agriculture back to urban areas where it's moved away. And I think, going back to what the vision is, we can, build a bunch of greenhouses, grow lettuces all day, and yippee, everyone's going to have fresh lettuce all over the country. But the eventual vision is for us to grow absolutely everything in the greenhouse. Pumpkins, squash. No, I'm kidding. We're not going to grow pumpkins and squash in our greenhouses. You can't grow pumpkins hydroponically. It doesn't fit in the trays.
I didn't know that.
But what we will do is that we have these great channels into supermarkets, right? We finally cracked the code and got into the supermarkets and work with these large corporations to have them see the light and see what we're offering. And eventually we can bring farmers' products from everywhere, and everywhere locally, that is, and bring it through our channel. And we have that relationship of trust to the supermarket, and so we can get more and more farmers' products on the shelves where we want to buy them. And that'll be, that's the vision, I think, in the long run for what we do.
So it sounds like what you guys are saying is that the solutions to enabling the expansion of the collaborative consumption model is urbanization and modernization itself. Is it? I mean, do we have to? I mean, the built environment may be the enemy. So what do we do?
I was going to say that. I don't think, and you brought this up earlier, that it's the way the world is progressing. It's not going to be like you can have your own acre of land and never see anybody and deal with anybody else. It's going to be based on the sharing economy, whether it's shared electricity, shared whatever resource. It's going to be based on that. So right now it's a challenge for us to grow our business because people accept it in certain areas where it's the norm. But it will become the norm, whether we want it to or not.
Yeah, I don't really see the sharing economy as currently constrained. It seems like the correct incentives aren't in place yet. So from our perspective, this is going to blow up when, or get really big when the price of gasoline goes up. So the thing that is constraining our growth is that the price of gasoline is too low.
Yeah. It occurred to me that one way to think about the sharing economy is kind of, that we've stretched a rubber band with the globalized economy. We've stretched it, we've pushed it, we've had access to all these crazy goods. We can get year-round fruits and exotic vegetables and cars from China and everything. And to me, one way of looking at the sharing economy is kind of trying to stitch up the net that's going to catch us when it bounces back and still enable us to have access to most of those things.
And so Sandy is another really good example there. So in the post-Sandy fuel shortage, there was also a shortage of taxis at LaGuardia Airport, and landside operations called Weeels as a critical tool and resource to get passengers out of LaGuardia.
Yeah, that's great. How much usage were you getting? Were you getting?
So we did the best that we've ever done because passengers understood that there was a lack of taxis and they weren't going to get out of the airport unless they used our system. So we were doing up to 50 passengers an hour.
So it strikes me that during this disaster time, all of the things that we're kind of working on did awesome, right? They did great. They were great. So we worked with Solar One to dispatch some solar generating units out to much needed areas, and that worked great. People were sharing taxis, and black cabs were showing up, and people were sharing those things that you had in your pantry that you hadn't, been using as much. And old sweaters and things you were donating, but not at a price. I don't know how the food thing works just yet, but we'll get there.
Actually, we lost a couple of crops of lettuce, so it wasn't great for us.
So it worked awesome for us. Yeah, but not to say, but these are resistant models.
Yeah, I was going to say it's about getting beyond that, though, because for us, big thing is oh, you guys are doing really well with the recession and everything. I'm like, well, the recession sucks. Yeah, and I still want to have a thriving company when the economy is doing great. I don't want to be doing well because something terrible happened to the world. But
isn't it rewarding knowing that you're enabling people to have the same behavior, do the same, buy the same fulfilling things that they were able to,
And you hope it catches on, and you hope in the same way that the people who experienced the taxis after Sandy were like, oh, that was actually super easy and cool and fun. I'll do it again.
I think exactly. It's interesting the way you think about Sandy and how all of our businesses change, right? And this topic of collaborative consumption. So as an investment banker, it's, what I used to do is basically position companies in the most positive light to receive investment. So after, in the early 2000s, it was, or late 90s, it was, early 2000s, it was security. A ultrafiltration system was a chemical decontamination unit. And solar was emergency response, and Weeels is emergency response. And then in 2005, 2006, it became clean tech. Everything was clean tech. It's a clean energy. It's resource constraints. We're solving everything. And the common thread is you position your business in the market that has the most explosive growth, and you try to get in there. But at the end of the day, all that matters is that you're showing the growth that that market is supposed to have. So if you call yourself a collaborative consumption business and you're going this way, it doesn't matter what you call yourself, you're still a flatline business. But if your business is going in the right trajectory, I mean, position yourself in the right way and you'll attract that kind of funding, and you'll, as long as you can exhibit that kind of growth. So I just thought it was interesting.
You look skeptical,
No.
Shawn.
No, there's a lot of lights.
Yeah, it is shy. Yeah, I think that. Well, let's go to this one. Let's talk a little bit. We don't really have an example of a classic sort of product service system here. I guess you guys at SolarCity are sort of, but the Netflix, the Zipcar, where everything is kind of owned in one kind of clump, and we are all the borrowers. But this person writes in, what are the advantages of collaborative consumption as a fee-for-fee service model versus a subscription model? Does anybody have any?
Define fee-for-fee for me. Is it a better?
Fee-for-service, rather. I read it wrong.
Fee-for-service.
Yeah.
So, all right, back to the question. So fee-for-service as opposed to subscription.
So I think they're asking, instead of in Netflix, if you're paying by the month or per video that you're getting.
So there's Amazon will allow
Is that
you.
right?
Yeah. So Zipcar is a good example of both, right? A hybrid, and I think SolarCity is a pretty good example of a hybrid where we do offer a payment that you can put down payment, and that will lower your fee for service, right? So you can do both. We actually offer a bunch of those, so that works out well for us, and it also helps us fit into how people are already used to consuming electricity, right? So they consume electricity by what they use, and people seem to be comfortable with that for some reason, rather than a flat fee. They don't want to pay $50 and just use whatever they want. That would actually be a really bad thing, actually, for energy efficiency, not policy-wise. But same thing with the solar model.
Right. How are you finding is the best way to structure your business to make a profit?
In our business, everybody operates on taking a percentage of a sale. So if you're on Etsy, except Craigslist, which is free. If you're on Etsy, if you're on eBay, if you're on Oodle, if you're on any of these services that are similar to ours, they take a percentage of the sale. And they often charge a listing fee as well. And so when we went about starting our business, we said, well, we don't want to do that. We're going to operate like the landlord. So therefore, you can pay to use our service. But if you get $20,000 for that coffee table, it's your $20,000. We don't want any of it. So we just ask a simple you pay per listing. But there's also a subscription model where, because we're really going after businesses that deal in secondhand items, so who are bringing in 300, 400 new things a month, and so they need to list those 400 things. When it makes sense for them to pay $1 a listing, that's a lot of money, but it makes sense for them to pay $10 a month. So we kind of have a various sort of hybrid model as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're selling resources, it makes sense to use a fee-for-service model, because otherwise you're sort of offering too many resources for a low price, and you're encouraging your customers to overspend, to overeat, to overdrive. But for some of our products that we're selling directly to corporations, like this ride consolidator that we're working on with Gawker, it would make a ton of sense to offer that as a subscription fee, because there's no sort of actual resource being expended other than computing power when we're creating these shared rides, or just these shared ride manifests for companies.
Okay.
I would expect some kind of exclusivity, right? I mean, if you're giving this to an agency, that they demand exclusivity to use your platform and no one else can use it.
You're talking about from like a user so that users would be groups.
Yeah, if you
users
go to
would be
consumers,
grouped.
that's one thing, but if you go through agencies, then it's a...
You know, that's been something that's been really interesting for us, and something we constantly preach as an agency, actually, is like in the online world, things are not going to where it's going to be one site that you go to. Like, you're not, in 5 years, you're not going to go and type in, you know, whatever, sunsetmagazine.com. The web is going to be this sort of overflowing thing where everybody's sharing, you know, which is really interesting because, of course, the sharing economy picked up steam with online things, but that's where everything's going, is it's going to be sharing. So when we work with partners, actually no one's asked that question. We thought everyone would be like, well, I'm not going to do it if they're doing it, you know. Everyone's been like, oh, it's actually cool because communities intermix, you know, everyone starts coming together and they're benefiting from that guy, everybody's benefiting. So
That's really frustrating, though, right? Because, I mean, I like to go to Amazon and just assume that it's the best price for everything that's out there, and that it's an aggregator, and that I can go to one site, one shop.
Right.
And, like, SolarCity, I believe, is not tied to any solar panel manufacturer, so theoretically I could get the best solar panels that have the best economic return as guaranteed by you guys. So I like having, I don't want to be in a web that has millions of sites for me to find one thing. You know,
Right.
I like to be in a web that has one site.
right.
Yes, you should go just to SolarCity and get all your solar prices needs there. That's correct.
People really like Google, though.
This is a good question. You talked a little bit about it earlier, but let's rain on this parade a little bit. Who are your unhappy customers, and why are they unhappy? Let's start with you.
Okay, so we ran a Thanksgiving travel promotion, trips to 3 airports. The passengers that weren't able to match into shared rides weren't unhappy, but in the exit survey that we distributed, only 2 out of 40, only 2 people responded. So for us, the passengers that aren't able to share are the ones that are not upset, but less likely to use the service in the future. So what we're doing is creating these very particular promotions where we can guarantee people shared seats. So the next promotion that we're running on December 22nd is one of these guaranteed promotions. So everyone that buys a seat through Weeels will be guaranteed a discounted seat through Weeels. And you have to do a lot of math in order to make that, make that a reasonable proposition. But it's worth it, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting for us because, again, a lot of these other marketplaces and what we're trying to combat is you're left on your own. You know, if you go to Craigslist and something terrible happens, you can't, unless someone gets killed or raped or something terrible, you can't write them and be like, hey, Craigslist, you know, this guy sold me this bunk coffee table. You know, they're not going to do anything. So really, that's actually been a big part of our business model. Is like we want to operate more like a store, where if you go to Krrb and you buy something and something sucks, you go to Krrb and we're going to figure it out for you. So we've had a few instances where people have come and said, oh, I bought this thing and it was actually infested with beetles, you know, which is true, yeah. And so the furniture was getting eaten away from the inside. And so we're like the mediator. So we're trying to find like a suitable solution between the parties. Another one, just
how do you do that? Like, what is your responsibility in that?
Yeah, it's
situation?
really difficult, and we're trying to figure that out. I mean, part of what we've done is, we've toyed with the idea of going crazy and being like, money back guarantee. You buy something, we'll take it back from you, and not the seller. You come to us, you tell us you're not happy, we'll take it back, we'll give you your money. You don't ever have to deal with this other person, you know, which is interesting because it gets away from the whole thing that we were built on, which is what keeps us, you know, away from that a little bit. But it's also the reality. Like, I think that would really blow up, but that would also be a huge financial risk for us to take.
I'm honestly, our most displeased customers are the ones where the install is just taking too long. And the interconnection process is just taking too long. The permitting process is taking too long. And they bought their solar system in November, and now it's August of the following year, and they've had a whole hot summer where they could have been generating electricity. And
I can speak to that, actually. My grandparents have a SolarCity system that they're leasing, and it's just the local regulations. They couldn't get it up for a year or so.
Yeah. I get an email a day about that.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump on your parade. So my complaint with SolarCity, if I had a house, which I don't because I live in the city, is it's a fun complaint, right? I walk down the street and I find $2 in the street. And I say, awesome, I found $2. And then he goes down the street and he finds $5. And I say, this sucks. I just lost out on $5.
3.
So, right, but I would have done the math eventually in my story. But thank you. I'm the finance guy, so can you defer those to me? So that would be the complaint. I imagine that some buyer's remorse, if you will, even though you're not buying from SolarCity, which is, I think, a somewhat ridiculous but somewhat understandable.
Yeah. I mean, we're not facing that problem yet, but it is mostly buyer's remorse is the problem because they are just given too long without it. Like they plop down their down payment and they haven't gotten the thing they've bought for a very long time, and that's where the buyer's remorse sets in. I mean, if they had actually gotten the thing that they paid for, I think they'd be very happy.
What keeps us up at night is this exact scenario, right, where someone buys our lettuce or our tomatoes and doesn't like it, and everything is built around our brand and being BrightFarms and people loving it and trusting it and knowing that it's local and knowing that it's delicious. One of the ways we try to address this is, and we have the luxury of doing this, is that we send our farmer in with the lettuce once in a while. So we don't package them, but we put them in the store and we say, hey, this is Farmer John, and he grew all your lettuce that you're eating here today, and he bought it, and he's happy to tell you about what's happening in the greenhouse and how it works. And I think that is going to go a long way, having a personal connection with a person that's growing your food to overcoming some customer
What's the cost of one of those, one hydroponic system that you would install on top of a supermarket?
It varies.
Yeah.
It's our costs, on the bigger you build it, the cheaper it is. And it starts at around $2.5 million an acre. And we try to build either on unused lands or on top of rooftops. And in fact, in Brooklyn, we're building once it's done and once we pass all the regulatory hurdles and SHPO, which is the historical preservation and building permits, it'll be the world's largest hydroponic rooftop greenhouse.
Wow.
I wanted to say one other funny thing about unsatisfied customers, and this is from a business standpoint, and when you're dealing with peer-to-peer or collaborative consumption, but as a business, you're kind of the middleman of that process. And, we can see what's going on in the back end of the system, who's buying what, who's selling what, and we can see messages come in, and a few times there's been messages from some really famous people, and we're like, oh my God, I can't believe they're using that. It's so cool. And then the seller just doesn't respond. And we're like, please, but we can't, we can't go in and say, can you please write this person back? You don't know who they are. So that's been frustrating for us. But
So while we're waiting around in awkward territory, can I get you to comment on the IPO rumors on SolarCity?
No.
No.
Good try. That was good. It's the closest I've come. Got a mic and lights and everything.
I've got them on record. It exists. There's something coming. So to wrap up, let's go with what I call the big question for each of you, and is that, do you believe genuinely that using models like your own, this collaborative consumption, can we rearrange our consumption habits as many of the environmentally conscious and socially conscious folks hope that we can? Do you think that this is legitimately going to be a shift in how we consume?
Yes, 100%.
yes,
No doubt.
Yes, 100%.
yes, 100%.
Yeah, we discussed this also. I definitely think that people are going to change the way that they use services and consume things. We talked about sort of not tricking consumers, but giving them stories that they already recognize. So for Weeels, existing metaphors, existing sort of street infrastructure like high occupancy vehicle lanes, just building off of services that consumers already know how to use, that people already know how to use. But ultimately, the shift in the way that these resources are consumed is different. We don't want to shock anybody into changing their behavior, but ultimately the consumption pattern is different, and I think that's inevitable.
Let me rephrase the question for a sec, because since in the last 2 or 3 decades we have consumed about a third of the world's resources, something like that. You guys probably all know the stats. If we keep consuming at this rate, if everybody on Earth consumed like an American, we'd need 6 Earths, is the classic. Can the sharing economy be enough of an antidote to set that right? Will it have an impact on that scale?
Yeah, for those of us who are left, absolutely. Yeah, for the remainder of the people who are left, the ones that don't die in the plagues and the fires and the floodings and all that, we're going to be great, and it's going to work out really good. And my example is Europe. So Europeans, everybody, there's like in the liberal elite of America, we like to go, oh, in Europe they have healthcare, and that didn't happen because like Europeans are better. That happened because they had less things. They don't have resources. They don't have forests to obliterate anymore. They don't have oil. They fished out their fish. They faced this problem, and some of them have come back, some of them have not. There were big wars fought on their territory, and they faced that problem, and that's just what they have left. So
before we see Shawn's vision for America, I think the answer is yes, to echo the panel, but let's try really hard to make it really easy for consumers to embrace new patterns.
Okay, I think that's a good place to wrap things up. I'd like to thank all of our sponsors here. We have Solar One and NY Acre and Con Ed. I have a whole list of people here. Loeb and Loeb, Green Tech Media, New York Associates, and Delve. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to WNYC Green Space and all of our illustrious panelists here. So thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.